This is not a tale of kings or warriors, but of an ordinary man who dared to challenge the untouchable. In a world where power twists the truth and the government silences those who question it, one man chose to resist. His name is Daniel Cross. Once a simple taxi driver, he had no wealth, no influence, no shield of authority. And yet his courage brought him to the center of a storm that would decide whether justice could survive against corruption. Tonight we follow his journey, a story of betrayal, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Daniel Cross never imagined his life would lead here just months ago. He was driving passengers through the crowded streets, listening to their stories, sharing the same struggles as everyone else. He knew the pain of high taxes, the empty promises of politicians, the weight of a system built to keep the poor in place. But then one night, while searching through old government records for answers about rising fuel costs, he stumbled upon something dangerous. Hidden files, secret transfers, evidence that billions had been stolen by the very leaders sworn to protect the people. For days, Daniel wrestled with the truth. He could have stayed silent, kept his head down like so many others, but his conscience screamed louder than his fear. He shared the documents with a small group of journalists, believing the truth would set the nation free. Instead, it painted a target on his back. That rainy night, the pounding on his apartment door shattered the silence. Armed officers burst in, tearing through his papers like vultures. Daniel fought to hold on to the evidence, but their strength was overwhelming. The man who had spent his life carrying others safely through the city was now dragged into darkness himself. The government wasted no time branding him a traitor. On state television, officials claimed Daniel had fabricated lies to destabilize the nation. They accused him of being funded by foreign enemies, of plotting against his own people. But Daniel knew the truth. He had no allies, no sponsors, nothing but the stolen evidence he carried in his hands. As the officers pushed him into the rain, neighbors peeked through cracked windows. Some whispered in fear, afraid that even watching might make them guilty. Others looked at him with quiet admiration, as if hoping his courage might one day protect their children. The rain mixed with sweat on Daniel's face as he was shoved into the black government car. In his chest, fear battled with resolve. Was he mad to think one man could stand against an empire? Or was this the very fight he had been born to wage? Deep down, he understood the cost. The government could strip him of freedom, crush his name, even erase him from history. But if he remained silent, the truth would die in darkness. And that, to Daniel, was the greater crime. The next morning, Daniel found himself in a cold, windowless cell. The damp walls smelled of rust and forgotten lives. Hours turned into days as he was interrogated relentlessly. Officers tried every tactic: mockery, intimidation, even promises of freedom if he would only sign a false confession. But Daniel refused. Every word he spoke was the same. The documents are real. The people deserve to know the truth. Outside, the story spread like wildfire. Independent journalists leaked fragments of the evidence Daniel had uncovered. On the streets, whispers grew into anger. Posters of Daniel appeared overnight, some painting him as a hero, others branding him a dangerous liar. The city was divided, yet in his silence locked away, Daniel became the voice of something greater than himself: resistance against corruption. Weeks later, Daniel's trial was announced. The government called it an example to anyone who dared to challenge authority. The courthouse became a fortress, armed guards at every entrance, cameras pointed like weapons, and journalists waiting eagerly for a headline. Daniel was marched inside in chains, his steps slow but steady. Across the aisle stood the prosecutor, a man polished and powerful, representing the state with a smirk of superiority. He declared Daniel a traitor, a fraud who endangered the nation. Every word was sharp, calculated to turn the public against him. But Daniel remained calm, listening quietly, his eyes locked on the judge. He knew this was more than his own trial. It was a test of truth against power, and the world was watching. The trial began with a storm of accusations. Government lawyers spoke for hours, twisting words, painting Daniel as a dangerous criminal. They displayed stage evidence, falsified reports, and even fabricated witnesses to condemn him. Each claim was met with murmurs from the audience, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. But when Daniel's turn finally came, he rose slowly from his chair, his chains rattling with every movement. The courtroom fell silent. With a steady voice, he told his story, not as a rebel, not as a politician, but as a citizen who could no longer look away while his country bled. He spoke of mothers unable to feed their children, of roads left in ruins, while officials grew richer, of dreams stolen from an entire generation. And as he spoke, even the walls seemed to lean in, listening. The prosecutor's voice filled the courtroom like a hammer striking stone. He painted Daniel as a man consumed by jealousy, a failed worker who invented lies because he could not succeed in life. With dramatic flair, he waved papers that he claimed were official records, proving Daniel's accusations were false. Laughter rose from government supporters, seated in the gallery, their faces glowing with smug satisfaction. But Daniel did not flinch. He had expected this. Expected lies, expected betrayal. What he did not expect was the sudden shift in the room when the prosecutor called his first witness, a government accountant. The man trembled as he stepped onto the stand. His hands shook as he raised them to swear an oath. For a moment, Daniel thought the accountant might reveal the truth. Instead, fear won. His testimony echoed the government's lies, his eyes avoiding Daniel's gaze. It was a performance, rehearsed 100 times, yet the hesitation in his voice left a crack of doubt in the air. As the hours passed, witness after witness repeated the same script statements, clearly designed to bury Daniel beneath a mountain of lies. Some in the crowd clapped after each testimony as if truth were a performance to be applauded. But not everyone was convinced. In the shadows of the courtroom, journalists scribbled notes, exchanging glances. Each time a story sounded too polished to rehearsed. Daniel sat silently, but inside his heart pounded. He remembered the faces of his passengers from years of driving, a mother clutching her sick child, a factory worker with cracked hands, a young student carrying books too heavy for his small frame. They were the reason he was here. Their struggles gave him strength. And when his lawyer, a young woman named Maya Ellis, finally rose to speak, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Her voice was steady, her words sharp as a blade. She reminded the judge that truth could not be erased by rehearsed lies. And in that moment, the tide began to shift. Maya's words cut through the tension like a knife. She questioned the witnesses, calmly peeling back their lies one by one. When asked direct questions, they stumbled, contradicting themselves. The gallery grew restless, murmurs spreading like wildfire. For the first time, Daniel saw doubt reflected in the judge's eyes. Then Maya revealed something the government had not expected: a letter, handwritten and dated from an anonymous insider. It detailed secret transactions signed by high-ranking officials. Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor leapt to his feet, objecting furiously. But the judge allowed the document to be read. As the words echoed through the chamber, Daniel's chest tightened. He had not seen this letter before. Someone out there was risking everything to help him. For the first time since his arrest, Daniel felt the weight on his shoulders lift, if only slightly. The courtroom felt heavier with every word spoken. The judge demanded silence, but whispers refused to die down. Maya read the letter slowly, carefully, every syllable landing like a hammer against the walls of corruption. The names inside were not small officials, they were ministers, leaders, men the people were told to respect. Now their signatures were exposed for all to see. The prosecutor roared, calling the letter a fabrication, but his voice betrayed panic. His forehead glistened with sweat as he pounded the table. Daniel watched him closely. This was the first time the mask of arrogance cracked. For years, the government had operated without fear. Certain no one dared to challenge them, but herein this room, truth had forced its way through the cracks like sunlight breaking stone. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, and in that silence he prayed, not for himself, but for those who had lived in silence for too long. He knew that whatever happened this trial was no longer about him alone. Outside the courthouse, crowds had gathered. Word of the mysterious letters spread faster than fire. Citizens chanted Daniel's name holding signs that read, "Justice for all and truth cannot be silenced." For years they had lived under a government that claimed loyalty but delivered oppression. Now through one man's trial they had found their voice. Inside, the judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His authority was slipping not because of the law but because of the weight of public eyes pressing against the glass. The courtroom was no longer just four walls, it had become a stage for the world. Journalists scribbled furiously, their pens racing as if afraid the truth might vanish if they stopped. Daniel looked toward the windows, hearing faint echoes of the chants outside. His heart swelled. He realized that even if he was sentenced to silence, the people were no longer afraid. A seed had been planted and it would grow beyond these walls. The trial dragged late into the evening, the weight of truth pressing down on every soul present. Maya continued her relentless defense, her words sharp yet calm, like a surgeon exposing a hidden wound. Each time the prosecutor tried to interrupt, she countered with logic that silenced him. The crowd outside grew louder, their chants transforming into songs of resistance. Daniel sat straighter, no longer a broken man accused of lies, but a symbol of courage. He felt the eyes of the people, of history itself, watching him. He understood that this moment would be remembered, not for the verdict, but for the stand he had taken. Even if the gavel came down against him, he had already won something greater, the awakening of a people. As night fell, torches lit the streets outside, their flames flickering against the courthouse windows. And in the courtroom's dim light, Daniel's face glowed with quiet determination. As midnight approached, exhaustion clung to the air like a heavy fog. Yet the trial pressed on, fueled not by procedure, but by desperation. The prosecutor, his voice now hoarse, scrambled to discredit the letter. He called it a forgery, a trick by enemies of the state. But his arguments rang hollow. His once commanding tone now sounded like the desperate cries of a man watching his empire collapse. Maya stepped forward again, her eyes unwavering. "This is not just a piece of paper," she declared. "It is a mirror, reflecting the corruption that has chained our nation. If the truth frightens you, perhaps it is because you have lived too long in lies." Daniel watched the courtroom stir. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty cracking. For the first time, Daniel saw fear not in himself, but in the system that sought to destroy him. The tension became unbearable. Suddenly, from the back of the room, a man in uniform burst forward, an officer loyal to the government. He shouted that the trial was a sham, demanding the judge ended at once. Gasps filled the air as guards restrained him, dragging him back, but not before his words echoed through the chamber. "The government will never allow this truth to stand." The courtroom descended into chaos, but amidst the shouting, Daniel felt clarity. The outburst proved what he and Maya had been fighting to show: the government feared the truth more than anything else. The corruption was no longer a rumor whispered in alleys, it had stood up and revealed itself in front of the nation. Maya leaned close to Daniel and whispered, "They're afraid." "Daniel, that means we've already won." His chest tightened, not with fear but with a newfound strength. The judge, pale and shaken, struck his gavel repeatedly to restore order. The pounding echoed like a drum of desperation, but the noise of the people outside grew louder, drowning even the authority of the court. Through the windows came the roar of thousands, their voices unified in a single demand: justice. Inside, silence slowly fell, not because of fear but because everyone realized what was happening. This trial was no longer confined to four walls, it had become the voice of a nation. Daniel, once a mere defendant, now stood as the unwilling torchbearer of a movement. His fate and the people's fate were bound together. As the gavel struck one last time, the judge's hand trembled. His voice cracked as he declared a recess. But the world already knew. Nothing could silence what had begun here tonight. The courthouse trembled beneath the weight of the people's voices outside. Windows rattled, banners waved through the glass panes, and chants of justice Justice rolled like thunder across the city. Inside, the jurors sat frozen, their faces pale, caught between fear of the government and the undeniable power of the truth. Maya seized silence. She walked to the center of the courtroom, lifting the letter high. "This is not just evidence," she proclaimed, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "This is a confession the government buried, and today it rises from the grave." Every word she spoke carried the echo of the crowd outside. Daniel felt his heart pound as if the chants of thousands were beating inside his chest. He was no longer simply fighting for his freedom, he was standing in the center of history. Then the unimaginable happened. A group of protesters forced their way into the courthouse. They did not come with weapons, but with banners, photographs of lost relatives, and candles held high. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to silence them or let them speak. The leader of the group, an elderly woman with a trembling voice, pointed at the judge. "My son disappeared because of this government's lies. How many more families must suffer before you admit the truth?" The courtroom erupted, not in chaos but in sorrow and solidarity. Jurors lowered their heads, tears welling in their eyes. Even Daniel felt his throat tighten, his own pain mirrored in the faces of the people. For the first time, justice was no longer an abstract idea. It was human, fragile, and desperately alive. The judge's hand hovered above the gavel, but he could no longer bring himself to strike it. His authority had dissolved in the flood of truth washing over the room. He looked at Daniel, then at Maya, then finally at the people who had come to bear witness. In that fragile silence, Daniel stood. His voice trembled, but it carried strength born of suffering. "I was accused of betraying my country. But tell me, who truly betrayed us? The man who drives a taxi, or the ones who steal from the people in the dark?" A wave of applause and sobs filled the chamber. The sound was not rebellion, it was liberation. In that moment, the trial was no longer about guilt or innocence. It was about reclaiming the soul of a nation. The air inside the courthouse felt electric, every breath charged with anticipation. Outside, the crowd swelled into the tens of thousands, their chants shaking the very foundation of the city. Inside, silence returned, not of fear but of unity. The walls of power that once seemed impenetrable now felt like thin paper against the weight of the people's will. Maya turned to the judge, her voice steady and wavering. "History is watching. You can hide behind silence, or you can speak with justice. Choose wisely." The judge's lips trembled. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a voice hollow yet breaking, he whispered, "The truth cannot be buried any longer." The judge's words ignited the room. Gasps, cries, and applause erupted all at once. The prosecutor collapsed into his chair, defeated. Jurors wiped tears from their eyes, their verdict forming not from fear, but from conviction. The foreman rose, his voice trembling but resolute. "We find the defendant Daniel Cross not guilty." The chamber exploded in thunderous cheers. The crowd outside, hearing the verdict, roared as if the chains of silence had finally shattered. Daniel, overwhelmed, buried his face in his hands as tears of freedom poured down his cheeks. For the first time in years, he was not a criminal, he was a man reborn. Daniel walked out of the courthouse into a sea of lights and voices. Thousands pressed forward, not to worship him, but to stand with him. He climbed the marble steps, the glow of torches illuminating his weary face. Looking to the sky, he whispered words not just for himself, but for an entire nation. The truth won. The crowd answered with a deafening roar echoing through the city streets. That night, Daniel was no longer simply a taxi driver wronged by his government. He had become the symbol of a people who refused to kneel to lies. And though the road ahead would be uncertain, one thing was clear. Justice had awakened, and it would not sleep again. And so Daniel Cross walked free, not just as an innocent man, but as a reminder that truth cannot be silenced forever. His fight was more than his own, it became the voice of a nation. Justice may be delayed, but it will never be denied. Thank you for watching this story of courage and hope. If you believe in justice and truth, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Together, let's keep the light of truth alive.